Alright, so I've had a horrendous week. I just had an Imitrex, so I have a few hours of feeling alright. And I thought I'd make a video just of something less intense than all the other ones, which is just the Dreamcatchers, how I made them and how to make them. First, the materials are you just get a metal ring, you need thread, then you need to wrap the thread around the ring. You need to tie one in with super glue. You need a clip. Occasionally clip it, and you need to keep it taut. And then you eventually wrap a full ring like this, and you need the filament threads. There's a number of different types you can use. And you wrap it depending on the diameter of the ring. I mean, you can wrap it. It's for a large ring like this, it's like maybe 30 wraps up and down for a diameter. And you usually want to give yourself extra room, even because if you start adding beads, depending on the type of filament you're using, the type of thread, it splits and it frays, and you have to keep chopping it off, and it keeps getting less and less. So what you're doing is essentially this. It's just you're wrapping around once and going through it and making sure the distance between each ring is the same. Then you sort of divide the circumference and you just keep repeating it over and over. Until it's wrapped all the way around. And then you just do it on the next run. So what got me into making these was getting sleep seizures, and some of them were pretty strange events. And I've always had vivid dreams, and lucid dreaming has been a large part of my life, I guess, since I was pretty young. I was taught self-hypnosis, and I was taught myself how to do it. The way lucid dreaming works is that, the way dreams work in general is that one part of your brain is spitting out information randomly. The other part is spinning it into a narrative. And when you realize you're in a dream, you can control the narrative, and you just be able to manipulate things using your imagination, using suggestion. So over the years, I taught myself a number of different techniques for lucid dreaming. I had a problem with losing sleep paralysis if I ever did something, a sudden movement or something. There was a number of times with nightmares where I would wake up just punching my alarm clock because I'd tried to defend myself in a dream or something. And so I had to, once I was aware I was in a dream, just figure out how to defend myself and control the environment. Flying is pretty simple after a while, and you sort of teach yourself, imagining that you're actually falling and you're controlling flight, that you're just imagining the plane, the gravity shifting, and there's just a force behind you pushing you. As a child, some of my earliest memories, even when I was about 3, I remember back that far, lucid dreaming. I remember being able to fly, and the way I controlled it was constantly moving in a circle. And that time I knew I had a stuffed animal that I was riding on, and it made sense, but the only flying in a straight line was difficult. The way I controlled it was always banking, just moving in a counterclockwise circles, just looping around. So when I got older, I taught myself different techniques, and the most valuable technique actually ended up being controlling time. Again, it was difficult to do at first, but essentially, in order to do something in a dream, like levitating an object, it requires a gesture for the suggestion. So just sticking out your hand, imagining, if someone was coming at me, all I had to do was stick up their hand and they'd be sort of levitating, and I would just sort of flick them and they'd fly away. With time, I would bite down on the left side of my mouth, and things would start to slow down and then start to go in reverse. And I could only do it for about 30 seconds, but that was usually always enough for the dream to sort of decohere, and whatever event was taking place was no longer taking place, and I could change the state. Found another method of doing it, which was looking down at my watch and just sort of going like this and seeing the little hour hand go back, and all of a sudden I'd look up and everything had changed. There was another method of just teleportation that I used, which was you find a device or something that you can manipulate that can tell yourself this actually does something else. So I found like a water fountain, and I bent my head down and just drank from the water fountain as something was charging at me, and just the water hitting my mouth. And sure enough, I look up and I'm in a completely different environment, because I just convinced myself the stream was taking me somewhere else. And they're pretty helpful in chaotic dreams. There's some dreams where it's, I write about them, but I'm in a place that's not even an earthly state, so it's sort of, it's in space. It didn't take me very long I still have some room left to finish it, but eventually you can add beads, and you have to measure them and sort of count, and eventually sort of put pendants, and this is one of them, but I don't quite know where to put this one pendant. I started using eyes because, what does the E stand for in REM sleep, right? Alright, so now I'm going to go through all of them, and this is the first one I put a pendant in, and I was just making one. I used to make them sort of compulsively after PTSD. It was over a decade ago I learned to make them in the hospital, and they were all just pretty simple ones like this. But that pendant was from my great uncle, and he had a stroke, and he was just not himself at the end. It was so bad that my mother wouldn't even let me visit him. So that was one of the only things I inherited from him, except from a few other things. So now I'm going to sort of explain how the patterns work. So this is a 8-inch diameter, and the circumference is divided 14 times. And really what matters with dividing the circumference is just counting the beads, knowing how many you have, and then figuring out how to divide the circumference evenly. And this is a biblical angel pendant. So this one is unique in that, one, the circumference was a prime number, which doesn't really matter if you're not trying to do spiral or subdivide it, but so each of the gold things on the outer rim, there are 2 loops at the top and the bottom, so I had to double a wrap around that, and then it's split. So that's why it gets more complicated and more thread, a lot more thread has to be used when you split it. So this is a better example of what I mean by splitting. So this is a 10.5-inch circumference and diameter, and the circumference is split into 12. But you can see how I double loop it after the first ring, and it makes the gap at the center wider and the net tighter. So this is an 8-inch diameter one, and the circumference was divided heavily, so the more you divide it, the more it sort of spirals, the tighter it gets knit. And later I started subdividing the spirals. So this one is a big one with the circumference is divided 19 times, and as many as I could get. And you can see how it's sort of not centered, it sort of goes up because of that. When I ended up actually doing a sleep study for the seizures, I actually brought this with me, because it takes like 45 minutes to an hour to put all the electrodes on, and I was really nervous because I was trying to tire my body out to make sure one of the sleep seizures happened while I was doing the study, and it never quite captured one of the most severe ones, and I was kind of frustrated by that. So this is how my family nicknamed them nightmare catchers and not dream catchers. This was right at the start after some of the extreme episodes. So it's divided 14 times, not quite evenly, but it's also doubled, and to the point where the thread changes, because I ran out of thread. It starts out as tan thread, and the center it goes to black. I was able to knit that in carefully. So as I'm remaking this, I forgot to add this one. This was meant to be parody to the other nightmare catcher. This is being sort of a biblical angel. Circumference is divided 16, but it wasn't doubled and split. I decided to go in a different direction. This is a raven skull. It's a little blurry. I had those sort of beads that are Dalmatian-like that just sort of looked like little eggs. So the picture here isn't the greatest, but this is one of the more interesting ones. I tried to make them less frightening later on. But circumference is divided by 12. This is still a 10.5-inch diameter, but it's a 4 sequence times 3. So when you have 12 is a good number because you can split it any number of ways. You can do 6 and 2, 4 and 3, or 3 and 4. So this one I actually don't like, and I wish I had not bought the yellow thread, but this is still another 12 circumference, but instead it's 3 and 4. And I was going to put a different pendant in that, and it didn't look right. And I still want to change the outside of that. Some of these I sort of cannibalize and just use for parts. I've made them, and then I sort of I need those beads on the wall, and then I just sort of take a knife and cut it open. So at this point I don't even know what I'm doing. I'm just sort of experimenting. I'm buying these pendants off Etsy and saying okay, what am I supposed to do with this now that I own it? And then sort of picking a color palette with it, but not as frightening as the other ones. A little creepy still. And then we're back to the others, but this one was actually the hardest of all of them. So this is small, it's an 8-inch diameter, and the circumference is divided 16 times. And what was difficult about this, the reason it's using white thread is because it's the thinnest thread, and the amethyst crystals are something I bought, and that is actually a huge thing I should mention, is that when you buy beads, they're intended for jewelry. You don't necessarily know the whole size at some of the stores. If you buy them online, you have a better chance of doing it. But most of the beads are actually, they're designed for jewelry. They're not necessarily designed for doing this. And so, a thread like this, it frays into 4 pieces like this, and you have to fit all 4 of them through the hole repeatedly, and it sort of falls apart. So this one is pretty simple. It's just it's divided 14 times again, but on a larger ring, and sometimes the larger rings are easier to do. So this is one of the earlier ones. Circumference is divided 12 times, but the most important thing was just getting the mask in there in the right spot and having it sit there. And this one's almost an identical method. It's just a different color palette, different mask. And this one actually predates all the other ones. It's one of the earliest ones I made, and I just happened to buy a pendant. That's an Aztec calendar, and it fit in the center. And then there's this, which hangs over the desk. So top is divided by 16 times, which is a lot, but I had a lot of those beads, so I could afford it. The other one was I had a lot of extra of the red beads that I just didn't know how to use, and so it didn't really matter. That was divided 13 times, and then I sort of dangled keys from it. So this is another one of my mistakes, and it's because of this. It's a large bead with a very small hole. It was not designed for this. And, this entire filament had to go through that. I don't know how I managed it. It took a while, but... And this is the last one I made. And I started putting clocks inside of them. I have a few other ones, but I don't know if I'm going to have them all ticking. They would drive me nuts. But it does work. It's over my shoulder now. The other one I didn't photograph is the spider web one dangling up in the corner. But I'm starting to work with full 14-inch ones. I made something with this and I didn't like it, and I took it all apart, and I'm starting over. So yeah, that's how my background came about. It was not intended as a background even. This is just happens to be where my desk is, and I thought of doing this. And Dreamcatchers are supposed to be in the bedroom. That's my front door, and I always sort of kept them there just as sort of a reminder of what I've overcome once I leave the door. But I don't make them quite as much as I used to. I sort of plan them out and then set them aside a few for gold in the next months or something, years, and they just sort of accrue. But there's also a lot that I just give away. I don't sell these. Sort of feel weird about selling them. But yeah, there's a lot I give away. I went to one and I sort of examined it, and I don't even remember making it. So long ago.